Hello and welcome again to another episode of Talk TV here on Pahrump's 46.4, your TV guide channel. Folks, in 2001, Nevada state legislature legalized medical marijuana, but there were loopholes and pitfalls galore in that. I have with me today Michael McAuliffe, a paralegal with the law offices of Michael Printy in Las Vegas. And Michael's going to give us a lot of insight as to what's going on with this very touchy issue. So take it away, Michael. Welcome to the show, by the way. How are you today, Michael?
Very well, Doug. It was a nice drive out here. Beautiful spring day happening out here in Pahrump, and I always enjoy coming out here.
So give us the lowdown on what this law actually says for someone who would like to have medical marijuana as a remedy for their affliction.
All right, the history of this is a constitutional amendment in Article 4, Section 38 of the Nevada Constitution. It was passed by two votes, one in 1998 and the second in 2000. And in 2000, it passed by a 65% margin. Two-thirds of the people supported the idea of safe access to medical cannabis for people who were suffering and in need. And the legislature was tasked in this ballot question to set up an appropriate method of supply for authorized patients, and they have failed to do so. They set up a program which was the most expensive program in the country to join. People had to jump through more hoops than any other state program, and yet once they did, there was no legal method for them to acquire either seeds or small plants or larger plants or finished medicine. Unlike any other medication in this country, people are forced to grow their own under statute. And not only is that just morally wrong to take people who are very ill and force them to be sustenance farmers year long, but it is against what the Constitution says. And I and others have been fighting this for years because we believe that when the people vote something and put it into our Constitution, our legislators are bound to respect the will of the people and the Constitution.
Mm-hmm. And Nevada, being one of 16 states, is it now?
16 in the District of Columbia.
Has the most restrictive access to medical cannabis in the country.
Absolutely, it does. It's an odd situation, whereas there is no legal method under NRS 453A for people to buy or sell their medicine or even share it. You are open to prosecution even if you're just giving it to another patient and you're a patient. It's a very broken situation without any doubt, and we need to fix it. We have tried to fix it and have had great reluctance from any sitting legislators to get this done. In the last session, our local assemblyman out here in Pahrump, Ed Goodhart, introduced Assembly Bill 438, which was a comprehensive reform of the program. And this reform had been worked on by attorneys, by civil organizations, by Americans for Safe Access, of which I'm a member of the coordinating committee here in Nevada, and it is the largest citizen group for medical cannabis reform in the country, and several of our legislators, and we spent thousands of man-hours crafting a solution which would address growers and bakers and dispensaries and patients and tincture makers in every aspect, and would have set up a regulatory system by which patients could obtain their medicine, and the state, if you look at per capita ratios with Colorado, which has about twice the number of people that Nevada does, within a couple of years, this program would be bringing in $8 million a year in revenues to the state, plus, of course, the revenues generated by legitimate businesses and support services out there. So we felt that this was very good, very comprehensive reform, and unfortunately, it was blocked by one man in the assembly, a speaker who has further political aspirations and didn't want anything to come out of last session to be controversial, which might impact his congressional run this year. And sadly, this one man was able to thwart the will of the people and subvert the Constitution.
Wow.
Politics in Nevada.
I personally know people here in Pahrump who have the, I guess you call it the license,
Yes.
to obtain medical cannabis, And that's the boat they're in. One lady in particular, she has to grow her own, and she's pretty much clueless. In other words, hey, you have to grow your own if you want to do this. They don't tell people how to grow it. It's just so messed up to see this go this way. But there might be some relief on the way because of a recent ruling, right?
Yes. I'll get into that, but
okay.
The problem that we have that you've just described is that you have something which the voters of this state have classified as medicine, and there are numerous medical studies showing the medical efficacy of cannabis, and so it is. And people commonly refer to it as weed, and it grows through ditches across America, and sure, anyone can grow a weed. There are dandelions galore growing in people's yards around the valley, but that doesn't make them consumable quality and of good medical efficacy. And in order to grow something which is going to be a good medical treatment, it requires skill, it requires practice, it requires time and money. And what we have now is a situation where people are thrust into this, and somehow by virtue of them getting cancer or MS or arthritis or any number of diseases, the state magically assumes that they've gotten the ability to be successful gardeners. If we take a comparison to insulin, the state is basically telling people, all right, you need insulin, that's fine. You have to get a special license to get that insulin. Then once you have that license, you can't go to the pharmacy and buy it. You have to produce your own insulin. But you can only do it in limited quantities. You can't grow too much. You can't make too much insulin, because then you'll be in legal trouble. And then if you're really good at it, you can't sell it to your neighbors. You can't give it to your neighbors. You're only supposed to make a certain amount, and that's it. And the amount of insulin that you're statutorily allowed to make is not enough to carry you through the cycle. Getting back to medical cannabis, the federal government in the federal medical marijuana program sends out approximately 300 grams per month to its patients. That's 10 2/3 ounces. Yet in Nevada, our law says you're only allowed to have 1 ounce at a time. And based on the federal amount that they're sending out, 1 ounce is only a 3 to 4 day supply, and for many people it could be a week or 2 weeks supply. But the problem is the cycle to grow these plants is 3 to 4 months. So Judge Mosley, in his decision last week, where he called the current medical marijuana law absurd and ridiculous, he pointed out that it makes people criminals as they get on the program and they try to comply. Because if you're growing enough to last you in a 3-month cycle, as soon as you harvest that, you are breaking the law, because you have more than the law will allow. And yet you don't, in order to have enough to last you until your next harvest, you de facto have to break the law.
So many things about it just sounded so arbitrary when they crafted this law. Like, why 1 ounce, and why this number of plants? And it's like they just threw it together to patronize both sides of the issue.
They very much did. You had a legislature who enacted this law very reluctantly. They didn't want to be associated with this. Politicians all think that this is an issue that is a third rail of politics, an issue that will cost them support as being soft on crime, and so nobody wants to touch this. And yet polls consistently show 70 to 80% support across the spectrum for the concept of medical cannabis and allowing sick people access to it. And yet politicians, even here, 11 years after the law has been implemented, are running away from this issue, and they don't understand that this is a winning political issue for them.
Yeah, they just need the political will to do it.
They need courage. Yes, they do.
And so the ruling that Judge Mosley made in the past couple of weeks is going to force them to do that, is it not?
It is, because there were 2 different cases that have been working through the 8th Judicial District over in Clark County. One is Sin City Co-op with Judge Mosley, and the other is Jolly Green Meds with Judge Smith. And Judge Smith had previously ruled that that there are problems with the law, but it's not unconstitutional, and so the case could go forward forward, but he stayed the proceedings because he knew that the defense was going to appeal this to the Supreme Court, the state Supreme Court, and they did. And now what's happened is in another courtroom in the same building, you have Judge Mosley determining that there are portions of this law, the distribution portions, which are unconstitutional, and as Judge Mosley said, ridiculous and absurd. And so the prosecution will be appealing this to the state Supreme Court. So it looks very much like the Supreme Court is going to have to weigh in on this issue, and one can only hope that they come down on the side of the Constitution. This is an issue that the people have clearly decided, and the state Supreme Court, upholding the Constitution, should tell the legislature to get off its duff and fix this law and allow people safe access for their legitimate need. And there's a big question on what is legitimate need, and that people are just getting on this program in order to get around and smoke pot and get high, and that it's not serious medicine. You talk to people who are undergoing chemotherapy. You talk to people who have MS.
Right.
You talk to people who have Crohn's disease or any number of other serious disease, and this is
rheumatoid arthritis.
Rheumatoid arthritis, absolutely. This is a medication that works best for them with the least amount of side effects. Part of the problem that we have with industrial pharmaceuticals are their long-term side effects. And even if you have people who have relatively, compared to those conditions, relatively minor issues, back pains, spasms, various muscle pain or nausea, and they choose to use medical cannabis, you can't say that it's a worse choice or they're trying to skate by, because studies have shown that long-term use of a class of drugs called nonsteroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, NSAIDs, things like Tylenol, things like Motrin, things like Advil. Long term, these are shown to do severe damage to both the liver and the kidneys. And so in the case of medical cannabis, there are no long-term negative effects. People say that cannabis smoke has a lot of carcinogens. Perhaps, but a study released in 2007 by Dr. Donald Tashkin of UCLA, who was actually working for the government trying to prove the dangers of cannabis, his study results showed that cannabis smokers have a lower incidence of lung cancer than not only tobacco smokers, but non-smokers. A study that came out just earlier this year shows that long-term cannabis smokers, as compared with cigarette smokers, have an increased, very slightly, but an increased lung capacity after years of smoking, where cigarette smoking obviously degrades the lung capacity. So the whole idea that it's harmful is really a bunch of propaganda which has no basis. And for anyone who says that smoked anything cannot be medicine, there's another method called vaporization, which basically heats up the leaf enough so that the oils, which have the medicinal component in them, will vaporize, and the person can inhale that without actually burning the leaves. So there are really no negative health effects when properly administered.
Oh, right. Awesome. So getting back to the remedy, Judge Mosley is tasking the legislature to go back to the drawing board and come up with something realistic for a remedy. It sounds like our own representative up there, Ed Goodhart, has it.
Yes. The bill, which was last time Assembly Bill 438, would be comprehensive regulation, taxation for the state, setting up a structure within the state to oversee the implementation of the program. And for those people who say, well, small government and we don't need another regulatory agency, the truth is setting up a regulatory agency to collect taxes and to oversee this are far less expensive than the amount of money that we're spending for law enforcement, judicial proceedings, and incarceration. So really, and not only that, but it takes money out of the hands of the black market that people are forced to now,
Right.
and brings it into a legitimate revenue stream for legitimate businesses and for the state in tax revenue collection.
Earlier, before we went to air, we were discussing the issue of, I guess, all these people having to go to prison for something like this, and it's an industry, and I would like to get into that a little bit more. But first, we have to get to the commercials. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after these few spots, and we're going to discuss some more remedies for those of you who need medical cannabis.